Hey everybody, it's your favorite 46-year-old life coach with braces. It's Liz, and I am a life coach that helps parents of autistic, ADHD children, any kind of child that you feel is a little bit atypical and you're struggling to know how to parent them more effectively. I can help. And if you watch my first two videos, I was kind of setting the stage for you about how life coaching actually is helpful, because it sounds like this sort of concept that's in the ether, and you're like, okay, I'm gonna manifest good parenting, and then I'm gonna show up as an amazing parent, or my kid is just gonna start doing what I want them to do. And that does sound a little wild, but it also kind of does work that way. But I want you to stay in the very simple belief system and strategy, which we call the model. So I talked in the original videos about sort of just introducing these concepts of the stories that we create. And we're all creating stories all the time about things that have happened. We're always making meaning out of these stories, and we're starting to really develop beliefs based on those stories. It's like when you meet up with someone they haven't seen for a long time, and they share a story about the past, and they have a completely different experience from that story than what you have years later, and you've lived with this story and you've told it in a different way, and you've created a different belief about it than they have, and neither one is true or not true. It's just the story that person created and how it impacted them in their life. Sorry, there goes my light. So a way that we sort of reference this system, this way of thinking and being and believing, is we call it the model. So the story is our model that we have. And the model, I'm going to put some pictures down here so you can remember it. But the way you remember the model is CTFAR. The C, I didn't get it. Sorry. The C is the circumstance. The circumstance is the event that happened. So if you remember when I was talking to you about the story, I was saying, what is something specific that happened? So you could say, my husband and I got in a fight, or my son and I got in a fight. So that is the circumstance, but you're going to use extremely neutral language, because you want the circumstance to be as neutral as you can make it. So instead of saying we got in a fight, you could say we said words to each other about homework, or, whatever, the blandest way that you can state what happened without making someone bad, without making it a thing that shouldn't have happened. It's just a very neutral record of the transaction. The second letter is T for thought. So this is where you're going to put the meaning in. What were you thinking when that happened? And every circumstance, every situation is going to have tons of models going on. But when I said you're going to try to remember how we talked about finding the thought that was causing you the most pain, or the belief? So that's where the thought comes in. And if you know that you were feeling angry, that's the F is the feeling. So now try to think, what was I thinking? What was happening in my head? Not in this interaction. Something was happening in here that was creating that anger. What was it? It's probably something like, he shouldn't have done this, or he's irresponsible, or if we're talking about homework, or he always does this and it's so embarrassing that I have to deal with it, or I'm a bad parent because I don't know how to make my kid do homework. It could be so many things. And you're obviously going to have lots of thoughts. So what you want to try to find is the one that is creating that emotion, that is then fueling the actions, creating the result that you're not in love with, that you think you would like to change, or that you would love to see something different playing out. So, and once again, there can be tons of models, but you want to try to focus in on one, because that's where you're going to have the greatest impact on yourself and on your kids. So you're going to have the circumstance, the thought. So we'll just use in this example, the circumstances, had a conversation with my son about homework. The thought was, he's being really irresponsible. the feeling was anger or frustration or disappointment or, whatever it was. And if you're thinking like you want to address what happened because of the anger, and you identify a thought, and then you're like, well, that didn't really make me angry, it made me frustrated. So then maybe try to think, what was it that made me angry? Was it like I don't have any control over his behavior, or he's always not responding to me? You want to keep digging until you can identify which thought is creating that feeling that you don't like. And once again, there's going to be tons, so you can go down lots of different avenues, and they'll all be really helpful when you can get really specific about what thought was creating what feeling that was driving which actions. That's the next one, CTFA. So which actions were being driven by that feeling of anger or frustration or sadness, despair, worry, whatever feeling was the one that you didn't like in that interaction, right? And once again, there are going to be tons, but we're just going to see one branch through to get the effectiveness of this tool. So then the culmination of all of those actions is going to be your result. So say you were thinking, my child is so irresponsible, and that was making you feel angry. And so then the way you approach that conversation with the child was like treating them like they're irresponsible, like they did something wrong. There's something wrong with them, things like, how come you always do this? Why wouldn't you do your homework? I reminded you, you're 18. You've been doing this for 12 years, Don't you care about your grades? Don't you care about finishing high school? Think about the things that feeling caused you to do, to say, or to not do. Maybe you would have been a little more patient if you weren't thinking. So that could be one of your actions, like I was impatient, or I used a stern tone, or I said these words, or I held my arms like this and kind of had a aggressive stance. Okay? And we're getting really intensely dissecting all of this because when you pay attention to how specifically the way that you're feeling influences your behavior, it's so much easier to see that connection between the thought that you had and the result that was then a cascade effect of that thought. And when you see that connection, you can break it up and you can change it. When you don't see it, you're just at the whim of all your thoughts, and you're just being driven by these unseen forces, but they're not unseen. They're not something that can't be seen. We're just not in the habit of paying attention to them. And so we feel like we're being constantly propelled by these emotions that we can't control. But the truth is, we can control them. I'm not saying that's the goal, to control all emotion. It's not. The goal is to understand where the emotions are coming from and weeding out the ones that aren't useful to us and reframing, creating new beliefs so that we can have thoughts and feelings that are useful to us, that create the results that we want. So if you want a result of feeling more connected and more understanding with your child, that you notice when you get into these conversations that you take sort of a defensive or a